This week, Steve Lipner from SAFECode joins us for the feature interview this evening. Our fine new friends at Javelin Networks will present a first in a series of sponsored technical segments on Active Directory or insecurity, as it were. And in the news, scanless port scanning, a case for longer passwords, lame two-factor authentication, router vulnerabilities, and IoT botnets, Flash, and you know what follows after that. And Android is vulnerable until we have, get an O, Android O, that is, all that and more on this episode of Paul's Security Weekly. This is Security Weekly, for security professionals, by security professionals. Broadcasting live from G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island, it's the show where exploits run wild, packets aren't the only things getting sniffed, and the cocktails flow steady. It's Paul's Security Weekly. Brought to you by Onapsis is the leading provider of solutions to protect ERP systems from cyber attacks. Customers can secure their SAP and Oracle business-critical platforms from espionage, sabotage, and financial fraud risks. Visit them on the web at onapsis.com. The average time between being hacked and realizing you've been hacked is 1 year. Can you afford to let an intruder roam your network for that long? Can your company weather the fallout when this comes to light? Black Hills Information Security can find the bad guys in your network and train you to do it yourself. Email consulting at blackhillsinfosec.com to find out how a hunt teaming engagement can help you find a persistent threat in your network. Has your network been breached? Cybereason can help you answer this question. Cybereason products hunt for threats within your network and eliminate them in real time. To Cybereason, real time means within seconds. Founded by former military hackers who don't play by the rules, they've built this experience into their platform. Harness ingenuity and imagination, not just code, to defeat attackers. Cybereason, disrupt the adversary and let the hunt begin. Welcome, everyone, to Paul's Security Weekly. This is episode 513. It is May 11th, 2017. I'm, of course, your host, Paul Asadorian, sitting here by myself on set at G-Unit Studios. Larry was running late, likely won't make it this evening, but on the lines via Skype, we've got none other than Mr. Jack Daniel. Jack, welcome to the show.
Where? What? Hello.
You got the granny glasses on too, huh?
Yes, I do. I like to think of them as Dumbledore glasses.
Mr. Joff Thayer even is here with us this evening. Joff, adorning his Hack Naked t-shirt. What's up?
Hey, how are you, Paul? It's good to be here again. And Jafire, right? That's my name.
Jafire.
To one of our listeners.
I had some fire going earlier, and I smoked a cocktail, which I had never done before. And the results are good. I'm liking this. Was like my third attempt. It got worthy of drinkable. And it definitely smells like a campfire. I'm trying to...
Last time we spoke of smoking a cocktail, Paul, you had a small device you were describing that fit over the top of the cocktail. Was that correct?
Yeah, I just used a glass. I don't know. Further experimentation is needed. We have the Smoking Hot Acidorium, which calls for tobacco liqueur. And while it smells like campfire, it's not really tobacco. So I'm kind of thinking I want to smoke it with actual tobacco. That's where I'm going next. But clearly a lot more experimentation is needed. So.
Well, let us know how it goes.
Yes. When I have the final recipe, we will feature it here on the show. A couple of quick announcements before we get into our feature interview this evening. ITPro.tv's courses now include Apple Certified Support Professional, CompTIA Security Plus, and ITIL Planning Protection and Optimization. Premium annual memberships include all video content as well as access to virtual labs and Q&A forums. You'd pay $85.70 a month or $857 per year, but We've got a special offer for our listeners and viewers. For a limited time, get 30% off a monthly membership for the lifetime of your active subscription using the code SW30. I'm also very pleased to announce the SANS Pen Test Hackfest Summit call for presentations is now open. Hosted by renowned hacker and SANS instructor Ed Scotus. They're looking for presentations on new attack techniques, remediation, challenges to existing security methodologies, and improving the business value of penetration testing. Send your submissions to pentestcfp@sans.org by 5 p.m. That's 5 p.m. Eastern Time, Friday, May 26th is the deadline, 5 p.m. Eastern Time, with the subject line, SANS Pen Test Hackfest Summit CFP 2017. The event will take place in November on the 13th and the 14th of this year at the Hyatt Regency in Bethesda. I always try and say that wrong. Bethesda, Maryland. Yes. Lots of fun to be had at the Hackfest this year. So hopefully if you got a good idea for a talk, you go ahead and submit that. I want to now introduce our special guest for this evening. Steve Lipner is currently the Executive Director of SAFECode, a nonprofit organization dedicated to increasing trust in ICT products and services through the advancement of effective software assurance methods. Steve, welcome to the show.
Thanks very much, Paul. Glad to be here.
It's nice to have you, Steve. So how did you get your start in information security?
Oh, Lordy. I was a staff member at the MITRE Corporation up in the Boston suburbs, not too far from where I think you're sitting. And I got assigned to look at the military problem of multi-level security at the end of 1970. And I said, I don't want to do that. You need to get somebody else. And they said, well, why don't you do it until we find somebody who can do a better job of it? And I never quite escaped. So I've been working on computer security, network security for 46 and a half years.
I think you definitely have most of us beat in terms of, and I think out of all the people I've ever interviewed, which we estimate as just over 400, that is the longest someone has been working in security, Steve. I don't want to set the bar too high or anything, but it's impressive.
It's sort of too stupid to bail out.
So the question is, are you still trying to get out or just waiting for the right person to come along?
No, I'm there for the duration.
Okay, good.
Once you get out, they pull you back in, Jack. So tell us, to start, Steve, what was doing security like in the 1970s? That's awesome.
So in the 1970s, it was about time-sharing systems, and the military had this notion that they called multi-level security. We were trying to build systems that could process sensitive, top-secret information and have uncleared or lower-cleared users. And we tried to build mathematical models and formal proofs and other things that seemed like a good idea at the time, and actually got more acceptance than they should have, and really didn't work out very well. And I stayed in the field, worked at Digital Equipment Corporation for about 10 years, worked for Trusted Information Systems building firewalls, and spent most of the 2000s, from 1999 to 2015, running the Security Development Lifecycle program for Microsoft.
So how did you come to work at Microsoft in that program?
So I had a friend who had worked there for a long time, and he sort of badgered me to interview. The opening they had at the time was the Microsoft Security Response Center, and so I ran that for about 4 years, and then switched over to spending all my time focusing on security assurance. Probably a little better fit than security response.
And was that in 2001, did you say?
I joined Microsoft in '99. Ran the Security Response Center till 2003. Was responsible for what they called the Windows security push, where we stopped all development and focused everybody on reviewing the Windows Server 2003 code base, and then the Security Development Lifecycle, the sort of organized process for building secure software, came as a follow-on to that initiative.
So when you when you joined and when you made the decision to stop development and focus on security for a period of time, were there events in the IT environments that were driving that? And were there also coinciding events in security researchers at that time?
So the short answer is you bet. You remember Code Red and NIMDA?
Yes.
Okay, so Code Red was July of '01. NIMDA was September of '01. We shipped Windows XP in August of '01, and there was a pretty widely reported vulnerability in XP right at the end of '01, and we just said, okay, we need to do something different to get ahead of this. And so some of the folks I worked with and I had a staff meeting, and we concluded that one thing we could do was just say, okay, we have some tools, we have some processes, we know some techniques. Michael Howard and David LeBlanc had issued their Writing Secure Code book. So we said, okay, if we take what we know and do what we know how to do and invent it as we go along, we can probably make some improvements, and that will that should make a difference. And we sold that to the executives and stopped all Windows development and trained 8,500 engineers at the end of January of 2002.
Steve, I just, hearing the story from an insider's perspective is just absolutely fascinating. And when I speak with people today that have a tough time motivating their developers to spend any time on secure coding, I want to know how you convinced 8,500 developers and executive management, external factors aside, right? What were some of the other convincing arguments and methods and techniques that you used to basically make everyone stop and focus on security? That's a truly amazing feat.
I have in the file cabinet behind me, I'm not going to dig it out, but I have a Seattle Times front page from late 2001, and the text on the front page is roughly "Flaming Security Disaster in Windows XP," and we were lucky that the developers at Microsoft were, and I think still are, pretty business-oriented, customer-oriented, company-oriented, success-oriented. So you see something of that magnitude that gets that coverage, and it gets people's attention, and they're with you in wanting to fix the problem. The executives, what I've said before is that no executive could have any conversation with any customer about anything but security at that point in time. And so those were the things that enabled us to motivate folks. That plus the fact that we had a reasonable technique that people could understand, why running static analysis tools, why building threat models, why doing security tests, why looking at attack surface. Those things would actually work, and so they were able to understand why what we were asking them to do wasn't just some empty exercise.
Did you, at any point in time in this exercise, acquire external help to also identify issues or help with the process?
We did. We brought in some of the top tier of that era security researchers, vulnerability researchers, as consultants, and they worked along with us on particularly on design level review, trying to look at some of some of the more critical components of the product, and help us get an understanding of what we needed to do to make them more resistant to attack.
How did you know when you were done and you could go back to a more regular development schedule?
So we watched the, well, I guess two things. So this is from memory a while ago. Two things. One, we knew what was in the product, and so we had a set of things that we said you must do, you will do for all the components in the product. So that was one answer. I actually remember we had a spreadsheet of every Windows component and the owner who had to sign off on it. That was one thing. And then the other was that we watched the productivity of bug finds, just in terms of what was getting reported and how things were looking in terms of, are we still finding new vulnerabilities?
So, with that process, sorry, I had a question and then it just completely escaped my mind. So a lot of the Windows vulnerabilities that I've seen over time and today, I don't want to say most of them, but a majority of them perhaps stem from the fact that you have to support legacy features in operating systems and applications. Was there ever a point in time, or what were the conversations like when you said, hey, what if we just stop supporting this and move forward? Like a lot of software companies do today, they just stop supporting things and users are outraged, but it's a double-edged sword. So how did you handle that with the team?
We were concerned, because huge customer base, and so you don't do something like that lightly. We did kill some features. I'm not gonna remember what they were, from what 15 years distance. But we did kill some features, I remember. And we also if we couldn't kill them, one of the things that we did and that survives to this day is do what we call look at attack surface. Basically, are these things on by default? Do they need to be on by default? If they don't need to be on by default, let's turn them off so that customers are protected, even if there's vulnerability still there.
Such as turning the Windows firewall on by default?
Firewall on by default, for example, but I think if I remember right, Code Red exploited a feature that was in IIS, and what would it have?
Was it WebDev? Was it WebDev? I think it was WebDev.
WebDev was later.
Oh, okay.
WebDev was later. But Code Red exploited a feature that was not widely used. I think it was some printing thing.
You're right. Yep. ISAPI.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. And so we said, okay, that's a lesson. Let's turn these things off by default unless everybody really needs it. And then, that's not an excuse for not security reviewing them, but it's insurance. And so, we did a lot of that at the time.
And then, so moving from the response team, where did you move in Microsoft after that? Well,
it was the team that wound up. I won't go through all the internal wiring diagrams. It wound up being the Trustworthy Computing Organization. Mm-hmm. That was where we created and sustained the Security Development Lifecycle, starting in 2004, and continuing. As I said, I retired in 2015, but the Security Development Lifecycle lives on.
Jack, I know you're pretty close to this topic, being a Microsoft MVP. I don't want to put you on the spot, but as you think of questions, feel free, or if you have one now.
I was actually interested in going further back because I know that, Steve, you were involved in some foundational stuff, and I've been doing a lot of history trying to learn what I should have learned years ago. And, things like you were involved in the Orange Book, if I'm not mistaken, and some other really foundational things after leaving MITRE. Any of those things that you want to tell us about? Like, I was surprised to discover the Orange Book was reissued a couple of years ago. There's some of that foundational work a lot of people are dismissive of, but it turns out it's still of value.
Well, it is, and it isn't. I mean, a lot. There's actually a paper I wrote for the Annals of Computing History called "The Birth and Death of the Orange Book," and I suspect it's probably findable somewhere on the web. And the Orange Book was interesting because we sort of built a framework for building security into operating systems, but the problem was that the Bell-LaPadula model, the mandatory security model, really is kind of a formula for building a system that's not usable in a practical way, and the Bell-LaPadula model was pretty deeply baked into the Orange Book. So that was that was a lesson I took away. But the experience was interesting. People still try to do evaluation. One of the things I'm going to sort of moving to the present and SAFECode, one of the things we've tried to do at SAFECode is to provide some guidance to customers who want to understand how to decide whether their suppliers have really done secure development before, as they're in the process of selecting and buying products.
Steve,
Cool.
go ahead, Jack.
Another thought on some of those early things. One of the things that strikes me is that in a lot of that early stuff, Orange Book, the Ware Report, some of the later things of that era, though, a lot of problems were defined in the operating system. And as easy as it is to be cynical, it's something I'm good at. When I'm honest, it looks like we've moved a lot of those problems, and Microsoft certainly led this, picking a lot of those problems up out of the operating system level. And, we're now stuck with them at the application layer instead of the operating system. But when I look at some of the foundational stuff, it's like, oh, we really do have operating systems that are at least pretty much securable, which was the goal. And in the intervening years, we've commoditized everything, so it's cheaper to run full computers than custom chips with QNX or something. Do you think that's fair, that we've at least moved the problem into the application space more than the fundamentally insecure operating systems of the early days?
Well, the operating systems are certainly a lot better than they were in the 70s compared. There are two things. One, in the 70s, security was sort of a hypothetical. People understood it could be bad, but nobody was actually exploiting systems. Today, as you all well know, we see real world attacks. We see real world vulnerabilities being exploited.
And we still have people that think security isn't a problem.
Yeah, there's that too. But what we wind, and so when you compare everything, we've done a lot today with operating system security. The thing that we didn't realize in the 70s was that people would be taking applications and exposing them through the operating system to the network, to hostile users, to malicious inputs, and that's something I think we've come to grips with. The SAFECode member companies build all manner of software, and all of them worry about, how do I build this software so that it can deal with malicious input? How do I build this software so that it can resist attack? And that's something I think in the 70s, in the 70s we sort of thought, well, we'll build the operating system secure, we'll implement the Bell and LaPadula model, that'll confine everything, and we won't have to worry about the security of applications. And when I said, that's a prescription for building an unusable system, that's kind of what I meant. We have to expose these applications to the web today, and so then we don't have any choice but to make them secure.
Steve, it was about 5 years ago, a lot of us in the security community started noticing that it was really hard to find a vulnerability in a Microsoft operating system. And I think increasingly today, even if you do find one, it's increasingly difficult to exploit it. Do you feel like a sense of pride that you kind of instilled those things foundationally in Microsoft, and were pleased when you saw those headlines come about that Microsoft had really done a really good job of securing their operating system?
So two comments. One, it wasn't just me by any means, but two, heck yes. And so, it's been, seeing the company, make those transitions and stay with them has really been something that, that's sort of the highlight of my career. I'm glad I didn't retire before that happened.
Mm-hmm. A lot of many companies, whether their products and the way that they monetize is making software, or if they're in some industry and they've created their own software internally to assist with their business, organizations still largely struggle with securing their own software. What kind of advice do you have for those folks, both, and I guess a two-part question, like non-technically trying to convince developers to write secure code, and both technically in methods to implement to help that process?
So non-technically, reading the papers, understanding the things that have happened to companies big and small, software or Internet of Things. It seems to me like you're really playing with fire if you don't pay attention to building software securely. Technically or operationally, I want to put in a plug for the SAFECode guidance that we've created, that the organization has created over the past 10 years. There's free training that organizations can download and have their development personnel go through to understand the various aspects of software security, or of building software securely. And there's also free guidance material about what we call the fundamental practices, basically the things that go into a secure development process, and also some of the specifics. We just released a paper, a couple of papers yesterday. One of them on what to do about security when you're using third-party components, and the other about threat modeling and how to integrate threat modeling into your development process. And so there are free resources that enable you to understand, okay, this is how I do it. This is how I get started. These are the things that are important. And it's not trivial, but it's something that organizations can do. It doesn't cost them a huge amount of money.
Steve, it's interesting that you have a history with Microsoft, and as we're talking, I'm reminded of on software engineering and programming, I can probably say this is my favorite book, and it's from Microsoft Press, Steve McConnell, Code Complete.
Code Complete, yeah. And
just
started that sentence, I knew what you were going to say.
Yeah, but so how much we talk about secure software development lifecycle and adding security into it and all of the different attacks and threat modeling, but how much of it comes down to just writing really good code, and that in and of itself is just a natural progression to being more resilient and more secure code. Like how much of that were you instilling in the culture, and what are your thoughts on that approach of just writing good code, like as outlined in Steve McConnell's book?
So if you go back and look at the couple things. Number one, again, the SAFECode training provides developers, not security people, but developers of real products, with guidance on how to build secure software. In terms of how you instill that, one of the things you go back and look at the Bill Gates Trustworthy Computing Memorandum or email of 2002. One of the things it does is include a call out to Michael Howard and Dave LeBlanc's book, Writing Secure Code, that was published right as we were starting all those things in early 2002. And so, it all comes together. You've got to be able to give people concrete guidance, and today I think we have a lot of that from the SAFECode material, from SANS, from other sources. And the other thing is you've got to motivate them. You've got to tell them this is important, and certainly there, but for the grace of God go I, is possibly a powerful motivator, at least for many organizations.
One of the things that I recommend to folks, Steve, I want to get your take on this, is I talk to a lot of security people that are trying to motivate their developers to create secure software. And some of them are in a really tough position. They're like, I can't make any headway. And I tell them, look, I'm like, do a lunch and learn. I'm like, buy them food, buy them booze. I mean, have 15 minutes or half an hour where you bring donuts or something to get their attention and to build trust with them. Is that something that you've done at Microsoft or recommend to others to help build that trust?
Well, I mean, so part of it, again, go back to 2002, when we did the initial security training for the Windows push. That involved getting 900 people in a room for 4 hours, 10 times. And each of those sessions was kicked off by a corporate vice president who owned one of the areas of Windows. And I don't know that it was 10 vice presidents, but it was a batch of them. And whoever it was stayed. I mean, it wasn't like you had these VPs, show up and say, this is really important. Listen to it. I'm leaving. It was more like, this is really important. Listen to it, and I'm staying and listening to it with you. And that's the sort of thing that makes a difference. I mean, people can tell whether you care, and caring is important. I mean, interesting training helps if you have people showing your existing code base and this is what can be done to it and this is why it matters. That can be helpful. Back in 2001 back in 2002, with the code red and NIMDA history, it was pretty easy for folks to make that connection.
Steve, and we're going to talk about this in the next segment, in several segments after that. And part of it is some of my research. It was inspired by my friend Josh Abram, who did a study. And basically, when we talk to people whose job it is to break into networks today, 80% of them are running Active Directory. And when I've interviewed, 6 or so different pen test firms and people that do pen tests all the time for a living, they're like, we really don't run exploits and exploit software the way that we're talking about it in this context. they're really exploiting design features or design imperfections that allow them to collect information and exploit the system, but with the existing features that exist, not resulting from a software bug necessarily. What are your thoughts on, well, first, how Microsoft could help this issue that I think is plaguing every major organization today that's trying to do security?
So back before I left, before I retired, I remember a couple of documents coming out from Microsoft on best practices dealing with. I assume I can say pass the hash, and
absolutely. That's exactly what I was talking about. Yep.
Yeah, and so there is there is a lot of best practice guidance out there, and there is configuration guidance, and starting out by following that is a huge help. Staying patched is a huge help. It's not a response to the to the design and Active Directory concerns that you mentioned, but the pass the hash guidance is pretty sound stuff, and the team there worked on that for a long time. So I mean, people start out by looking at that and then taking it seriously.
Yeah, it's interesting the number of attacks that I've learned of since then, and I guess it speaks going back to our legacy conversation, right? To truly get rid of a lot of the design shortcomings in Microsoft and Active Directory environments, you basically have to get rid of Windows 95 and 98. Now, that's not a bad thing. However, there are a lot of organizations, healthcare specifically, that just can't do that. So what's your advice for organizations that really do care about security, care about software security, but are stuck in that legacy situation?
Boy, I haven't had to manage that situation myself. So this is sort of shooting from the hip. But if I were stuck in that posture, a thing I would be trying to do would be to firewall and isolate as much as I could, just to don't keep your systems that are that old legacy and have to be still operating isolated and firewalled off, and no kidding, as separate as you can make them. Either they're used to term jump boxes, or use virtual machines to keep A away from B, or separate networks, or what have you.
Yeah, even outside the domain is oftentimes what we recommend.
Yeah, that's it.
So, Steve, let's back up a little bit. I know you mentioned SAFECode. So you left Microsoft. Did you go directly to SAFECode, or?
No, so Microsoft is one of the SAFECode member companies, and I had been the chair of the SAFECode board from about 2011, I think, till I retired. And after I retired, I was doing some other things, a little consulting, some committees for the National Research Council and the Defense Science Board, and basically not involved with SAFECode. And then and Howard Schmidt had been the executive director. We brought him on, I think in 2012 or 2013. Howard is, as you know, passed. Or I assume you know,
yes,
passed away at February, beginning of March this year, and he resigned retired as executive director, at the end of 2015. And so the board thought about, what they were going to do. They asked me to come in as the executive director at the beginning of December last year. So I've been with SAFECode in this capacity for about 6 months now, 5.5 months. Obviously, very familiar with the organization going back to the time it was formed.
And so what can the security community do to take advantage of SAFECode as a nonprofit organization making resources available, I'm assuming?
So it is a nonprofit. It exists both to share best practices and techniques among the members, and also to share best practices and techniques with the community at large. And if you go to www.safecode.org, and go to the publications tab, the free guidance document, the new threat modeling document, the new third-party component document, the fundamental practices document, batch of other things are there, and they're free downloads. Just pull them down and use them. And then there's also a link on the SAFECode homepage to the training material, and the training is on a separate subsite. And again, that's free online training that you can download and use.
And that training is primarily focused on developer, security people, both?
Primarily developer security. So there's using Windows securely for developers, using Linux securely for developers. I'm not going to remember all the courses. Secure coding in C and C++, fuzzing, static analysis. I'm not sure there's one on static analysis. Threat modeling, batch of there are probably between 15 and 20 courses all up.
When it comes to threat modeling, Steve, I get a lot of questions about, which model should I use? How should I implement threat modeling? What's your response at a high level when people ask you, I want to get do you have developers do the threat modeling? Do you have the security team do the threat modeling? Like, how do you start to formulate your approach to threat modeling for software applications?
So the threat modeling document that we just released is a great introduction to basically. I mean, it was written to answer those questions, and so it depends to some extent on your organization, its competence, where the capabilities are, and so on. In general, I think you want to get people from the development team engaged in the threat modeling. You don't want to just throw the design over to the security team somehow, and have them do the threat model and then tell the developers back, okay, these are the things you need to change. It's far better if you can engage the development team in the threat modeling. They understand what the product really does. They understand what the design really does, and so they can tell how it really works and where there are issues that are going to need to be addressed that an outside, a less involved security team might not be able to find. And then the other thing is that in terms of technique, there are lots of books, several books, several techniques, different approaches, and we talked about it. We talked about it in the SDL book that Michael Howard and I wrote about 12, 14 years ago. Adam Shostak's book is a great resource. Some others, one by a lady from Intel, who's also involved in the SAFECode project, and so a lot of different resources there. But you find something that is a technique that you can do, and you don't have to. it's more important that it work for you than it is that you use a specific tool or use a specific method. I mean, people do it. People do successful threat modeling with Word documents or Visio diagrams or diagrams on whiteboards. I'm personally, I sort of grew up with threat modeling, starting from data flow diagrams, so believe that a lot. But there are a lot of other techniques too. And as I say, the document we just released talks about a lot of those alternatives and techniques.
One of the challenges, Steve, that I have with threat modeling and developers is getting developers to think more like a hacker, right? I find that developers, and I'm sure you've experienced this too, right? Developers love to build things, and then when security folks and hacker-minded folks come in, we tend to think about how you should break things, right? And I sometimes use the analogy like if we were to design a hammer, right? Like we would make sure that it could hammer nails, pull nails out. We'd put some safety protocols in there and make sure that the head doesn't fly off when you bring it back. But what we don't design against is someone taking that hammer and bashing everyone else over the head with it, right? So how do you get developers to kind of think about all of those other use cases and think more like a hacker?
So it's funny, when we first started doing security work at Microsoft, we were trying to teach people to think like a hacker and, teach the broad developer population to think like a hacker. Mm-hmm. And that didn't work especially well for us either. Mm-hmm. The threat modeling techniques that I've found pretty successful. Basically, this isn't the only one, but thinking about I don't know if you've heard the term the stride threats: spoofing, tampering, repudiation, mm-hmm. information disclosure, denial of service, elevation of privilege. Mm-hmm. Thinking about the stride threats and thinking about how they apply to elements of a design, elements of a data flow diagram, and having a little bit of a catalog of what each of those stride threats is and how they apply, gives somebody who's a developer but not a security specialist at least a heads up or a leg up in terms of being able to look at a design, look at a data flow diagram, and understand what might happen. And that's sort of a start where you can take somebody who understands the design but is not a deep security specialist, and they can at least do something that'll help them find some threats, find some concerns that they might not otherwise have noticed. And then if you compare them, if you've got enough of a security team so you can pair them with somebody from your security team, that's really an amplifier, and it'll help you do a better job yet.
I love that answer, right? Because you're not going to make, in your case, when you're at Microsoft, right, 900 or 8,500 developers, you're not going to turn them into hackers, certainly in any given amount of time. But what you can do is give them a template to make them more effective at writing resilient code, and that's really what threat modeling is about, right?
Yeah, I mean, you want to help them do the right thing. So the threat modeling helps them with the helps them at the design level, the structure of the software level, and then the other tools that are part of your secure development process, the fuzzing or the static analysis or the configuration guidance of the banned APIs help them do the right thing down at the code level.
It's fantastic. Jack or Joff, more questions for Steve.
Well, I think I'll let Jack, I'm sure he's got some burning questions, and Paul, you pretty much covered all the things I was thinking of, so over to you, Jack.
Yeah, I think we've covered it pretty well. I just, it's worth pausing at this point to say, Steve, thank you for everything you've done for our industry and for continuing to do it. It's you mentioned Howard Schmidt, and we also lost Becky Bass a month ago, and it's great to see you still out there and contributing and making the world a better place. And things like that. I think it's fantastic, and I'm looking forward to digging into that report on the Orange Book, add some context to some of my history stuff.
Thank you.
Steve, I mean, to say I thoroughly enjoyed our interview is an understatement. We could talk all night. We'll have to bring you back. That's how much I enjoyed it. I do have 5 silly questions for you that we ask of all of our guests to get to know our guests and share some silly information. So are you ready to play 5 questions with Security Weekly?
Sure.
3 words to describe yourself.
Serious, introverted, and occasionally humorous. That's 4.
If you were a serial killer, what would be your weapon of choice?
Maybe a hack on somebody's automated braking system.
I just want to say that I really enjoy it when people don't come up with an instant answer, because this obviously is not something he's thought about.
That's a very good observation, Jack. Steve, if you wrote a book about yourself, what would the title be?
An inadvertent career.
In the popular game of Ask Grabby Grabby, do you prefer to go first or second?
Oh man. So am I allowed to pass on that one?
You can. Yeah, absolutely. The answers are completely your own. There is no right or wrong answer, nor is there a requirement to give any said answer. So
pass on that one.
Choose 2 celebrities to be your parents.
To be my parents.
Yes. Alive, dead, fictional, nonfiction.
George Patton and Katharine Hepburn.
Oh, that's fantastic.
Whoa, that's outstanding.
Steve, I can't thank you enough for coming on the show today, instilling your wisdom upon us. It was absolutely fantastic. It was nice meeting you, albeit virtually. Dinner and drinks on me next time we see each other. So,
thank you very much. I think we covered some of the SAFECode material pretty well. We didn't really talk about the third-party component document. That's a good one for folks who are depending on other people's software, and I just want to encourage your audience to look at that one as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a great opportunity to maybe bring you back on one of our other shows to focus in on some of those specific topics like third-party software, which a lot of organizations struggle with. So, fantastic.
I'd be happy to do that. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Steve. With that, we're going to take a short break, come back, bring on our new friends, Javelin Networks. So stay tuned.